It was the American war, not our war.
Canada was involved, big time, in a big way.
In the 1950s, North America boomed. Cars, new appliances, and television sets were transforming the popular landscape. In Canada, the influence of life south of the border was pervasive. American music, movies, pop culture icons. Along with all of this, the evolving politics of the Cold War.
To a substantial degree, in one form or another, socialism has spread the shadow of human regimentation over most of the nations of the earth. And the shadow is encroaching upon our own liberty.
Somewhere along the line, this must be blocked. It must be blocked now.
In 1954, Vietnam is divided. In the north, Ho Chi Minh's communists hold power. In the south, an autocratic regime increasingly supported by the United States.
We are attempting to help Vietnam maintain its independence and not fall under the domination of the communists.
Canada's official role in Vietnam involves membership on the International Control Commission, or ICC, a neutral body overseeing the uneasy truce between North and South. By 1964, fearing their ally in South Vietnam will collapse, America is on the precipice of full-scale war.
To leave Vietnam to its fate would shake the confidence of all these people in the value of an American commitment.
With the truce undermined, Canada finds itself playing both neutral observer and American ally, peacekeeper and arms dealer. Canada is not officially at war, but for thousands of young Canadian men, Vietnam becomes a place to fight and die.
My intention was to join the U.S. Army with the sole goal of going to Vietnam. You know, I had looked at the Canadian military, but again, I didn't feel like spending 3-5 years in barracks.
For many Canadian men in the 1960s, the Army promises a job, adventure, and honor. And no army captures the imagination like the American Army.
The American way of life sort of intrigued me, that they were pretty tough. The soldiers were good soldiers, and I wanted to be one of them. I wanted to be somebody.
Ever since I was about 5 or 6 years old, I always wanted to be a Marine. So 17 years old, I kind of quit school, and I wasn't doing much of anything, so that's when I decided to join the United States Marine Corps.
From all across Canada, thousands of young men head south to volunteer. With the war in Vietnam escalating, they are welcomed by American recruitment officers and fast-tracked into service.
Young men would go down, they'd be given a letter of acceptance from the Pentagon, they'd come back. The American consulates or the American embassy in Canada would then grant them a visa and a promise of citizenship. We know that anywhere between 10 and 40,000 Canadians enlisted in the American armed forces. Considering Canada was not an active participant in Vietnam, that was a considerable number.
While we didn't encourage it, we didn't take offense at it, because after all, people are free to do what they like, and if they felt that strongly, why, there was really none of our business.
I believe that the Americans were right. I believed in stopping the spread of communism. And
communism was bad. Communism was no good for anybody. Communism had to be stopped no matter what the price. That's the feeling we went over there with.
They thought the war was just, they went to fight. Others thought it was a kind of a big game of cowboys and Indians.
And I was looking forward to the excitement, the thrill, the adventure.
Unlike those who travel south to volunteer, Les Brown lives in California. Although still a Canadian citizen, he finds himself facing the American draft.
I had made plans to leave the country and return to Canada. But the closer I got to my induction date, I lost my resolve, and for reasons I still don't understand, I waited for the draft date to come, and in fact it did. And then the next thing I knew, I was in the jungles carrying an M16.
While the U.S. Army has many missions in many lands, the attention of our nation is focused inevitably on Army activities in one particular part of the world, Vietnam.
Some folks are born made to wave the flag, ooh, they're red, white, and blue. And when the band plays Hail to the Chief, ooh, they point the cannon at you. Now, get at me, get at me.
You know, it never entered my mind was the phrase, "It's not my war." Never, not once. No, it was my war, because I volunteered. Nobody forced me to go.
We were like them, gung-ho, but most of the young people were just drafted, where we were volunteers. And we were crusaders. Their name for us was crusaders. I had a nickname called Canuck. They used to call me Canuck.
So I had something to prove for Canada, that I was going to be a good soldier for you guys. I'm not going to let you guys down. You know, really, this was in my mind. Could make you proud, Dad, you know.
Being a Canadian, like I said, I probably could have said, no, I'm not going. I'm going back to Canada, and you go on with your little war and do whatever. But I made a 3-year commitment. If being in the Vietnam War was part of being a Marine, then that's what I was going to do. I wasn't about to back out on that.
Communist forces in Vietnam include the National Liberation Front, or Viet Cong, as well as regulars of the North Vietnamese Army. They are motivated by a strong sense of nationalism, galvanized by decades of fighting foreign occupation.
The Viet Cong is physically tough, mentally courageous. He gets an awful lot of mileage out of minimum resources. He can endure an awful lot of hardship. He's cunning. He's an enemy to be respected.
We believe our cause. Vietnam is a small country, and very small amounts of weapons compared with America.
It was the whole country, ready to go to war against the Americans. Here in Hanoi, you can see at the weekend on Sunday, hundreds of thousands of young men pour into the street, shouting slogans against the American invasion of Vietnam, and they were ready to go to the front.
We are fighting for our independence and also freedom. The question of Vietnam being divided and reunified is a question of the Vietnamese. It should be settled by the Vietnamese, not with the presence or the intervention of American or foreign troops.
It was always spooky, obviously, being inserted into an area where you hadn't been before and you weren't familiar with, and you didn't know who was there and how many of them.
Lightly armed, communist forces make use of small improvised munitions placed in the way of their enemy.
Well, all the training you have and all that is how to use weapons, how to defend yourself, you know, how to escape and evade, and all these other things. But nobody tells you that when you arrive in country, that every single place that you're at is dangerous.
You had to watch every step you took over there, and I mean every single step. The Viet Cong laid landmines, booby traps, punji pits, all over that country.
Damn. He booby trapped our booby traps. Win some, lose some.
The first person I seen die was a person in our platoon that I was attached to. He went down a hill to get some water out of a stream, and he grabbed onto a tree branch, and the Viet Cong had placed a grenade up in the tree. And as he grabbed onto the tree branch, the grenade came swinging down and hit him in the stomach. He died in such a way that he was unrecognizable as a human being.
But the kids were the indicator of what was going on. If the kids were hanging around you and were near you and they were smiling and yelling, for some reason they knew what the hell was going on. But if you didn't see any kids, then the hair on your back would sort of go up.
And then all of a sudden it was the highest you ever been. There's no dope could put you that high. You'd be so high, terrified.
You get into a firefight, you start shooting. It's them or you. You put that in your mind. If you don't kill them, they're going to kill you, or they're going to kill your buddies. There's nothing as exciting as a firefight. You know, surviving a firefight, with the bullets whizzing all around you.
You know, I went my pants without even knowing it.
I distinctly recall at one point where I realized that I was going to die in Vietnam, because there were just so many ways of being wasted that survival didn't seem possible.
After long days of patrolling in the jungle, soldiers set up camp in the evening. While some sleep, others keep watch on the perimeter.
The nights over there seemed a lot blacker than they were on this side of the world. I mean, literally, you could literally put your hand in front of your face an inch away and not be able to see it.
You're damp, you're cold, you're hungry, You're lonely, you're scared, and all the elements sort of catch up to you. They're all surrounding you, and you're trying to fight them off, but you lose.
Bushes start to look like people. Trees start to look like people.
That's the worst time. You know, we used to say the nighttime belongs to the gooks.
Charlie owns the night. He did, he owned the night.
Encamped in the dark on Hill 22, named for its elevation in meters, Monty Coles recalls a sudden attack on their position. The first two lines of defense fall rapidly.
And then the third line of defense was around the command post, which is where we held them. And at that point, it became hand-to-hand combat. Somewhere in the fight, I lost my rifle. I was using it like a baseball bat at one point, and I lost it. It got to the point where you were grabbing the enemy by their heads and breaking their necks. One particular fella, I grabbed him by the throat and yanked his throat out. And you were smashing heads with rocks, stabbing people with bayonets. Literally anything you could get your hands on. And as fast as you killed one, there was another one there to take his place. And this was going on all over the hill. Just a constant battle for 3 or 4 hours. And once the battle is over and you realize you're alive, that's when you collapse.
Along with troops on the ground, a massive air war is launched against communist targets.
I don't know whether we can describe it. I mean, it's awful. It's terrifying. They called it carpet bombing. 3 kilometers wide and 5 kilometers length. You can't run away. There's no way you can run away from the B-52. It was very painful. For the first time, you had to bury your friends. That happened again and again and again in the 6 years we lived in the jungle. Every time, the feeling was just the same.
The war effort requires a constant supply of firepower. Back in North America, Canada is well positioned to meet the rising demand. CBC journalist Knowlton Nash recalls the business behind Vietnam.
Canadian industry certainly contributed an awful lot to the United States in terms of the military buildup and the materiel for use in Vietnam. There's no doubt about that. We shipped down enormous amounts of nickel and ore and bullets and planes and other ammunition.
We were entirely integrated with NORAD into the American arsenal, and essentially what we did is supply parts.
Well, the policy was non-participation. Now that didn't mean that we didn't sell the Americans material, because we did. I wouldn't say we were happy with the situation, but at the same time, we took their money.
While Canadian industry booms, sustained American bombing of North Vietnam also draws Canadian criticism.
The Canadian government often raised concerns about the barbarity of the American war. Not the prosecution of the war itself, but its barbarity.
In April of 1965, Prime Minister Lester Pearson speaks at Temple University in Philadelphia.
He praises the American war. He says that it is a war that is, it's not imperialist, it's a just war. But he asks a question which is extremely discomforting to the American president in particular. And he says, would it not be possible to stop the bombing temporarily to see what the North Vietnamese response will be?
And Johnson just lit into him. They had a very chilly lunch, and then he took him out onto a terrace after the luncheon and began to give him what was known as the Johnson treatment. He's grabbing his lapels, shouting at him, whispering at him, putting his nose right into Mr. Pearson's nose.
Pearson thereafter knows never to broach the subject again. This, I think, marks a moment when Canada and the United States start to deviate in general approach to the war.
I think in Vietnam, most senior American military officers feel that Canada is a bunch of freeloading, hypocritical loudmouths preaching peace and yet freeloading off the war by selling military supplies to them. They just cannot understand why we're not joining them in this holy war crusade against this faceless communism in South Vietnam.
There were segments of the society that demanded that we join the war, and were those who wanted us to break with the United States.
The politically active group in Canada, students and young people and intellectuals, were by far overwhelmingly opposed to the war, and it was their presence really that was being felt.
At the time, Simon de Jong and Judy Pocock are students in Vancouver and Toronto.
But there was a shift in consciousness, and a lot of different factors came into play. And certainly the war in Vietnam was a big one, a very big one.
I mean, pretty early on, it became apparent that it was, you know, a terrible, terrible war.
It wasn't the business of the United States to interfere. It was a civil war.
Canadian complicity becomes a key rallying point for the peace movement north of the border.
We sold $2 billion worth of weapons for the prosecution of the war. We allowed the Americans to practice carpet bombing over Canadian skies. We tested the dreaded Agent Orange in Gagetown, New Brunswick.
It was only later, of course, that we found out that it was a very dangerous chemical, and the after effects years and decades later. But at the time it was just presented as something routine, like, well, I'm going to spray my garden with this and it'll kill all the dandelions, you see, so, well, okay.
Jet engines, bomb casings, explosives, green berets, food and beverages, cartridges, monitoring systems, trucks, tank parts, bullets, napalm. There was probably a Canadian part in every single American weapon.
In 1966, despite 2 years of battle, American firepower fails to bring a decisive victory. For the civilian population caught in the crossfire, the costs of an escalating war are tremendous. Villages suspected of supporting communists are targeted.
It is evident everywhere I go in Vietnam that the American fighting man of this war is the best trained soldier we have ever put into the field. He can enter a village from which he has been fired upon, destroy or rout the Viet Cong, and then show compassion for the families left behind.
And you'd enter along these paths or trails, evenly spaced out, like not too close together, weapons at ready for just about anything that may occur.
We would come into that, and we would just gather, go from hutch to hutch, knock over everything, look for weapons, look for any kind of contraband.
If you found hidden caches of food, rice, whatever, you usually burned it to deny the enemy the use of it.
We're a soon-to-be VC. This entire area has been under VC control for many years, and we consider every suspect to be VC.
Then we would, at times, burn their huts, destroy the village, and so on.
Fighting soldiers from the sky, fearless men who jump and die, men who mean just what they say, the brave men of the Green Beret.
We felt personally that it wasn't warranted, you know, but we carried it on reluctantly and under protest, as you would say.
100 men will test today, but only 3 when the Green Beret trained to live.
One thing I think that really bothers me the most about it, though, is the civilians, Vietnamese civilians, what they're having to put up with. They're the ones that are really coming out on the short end of the whole thing, the way I can see.
And some of these people didn't do us any harm at all, so we started creating enemies right there.
I looked up and spotted it was an NVA. He had a green uniform, had an AK, and it was like a quick draw old thing. I opened up in him, he opened up in me.
If you got ambushed from a tree line, 9 times out of 10 you'd call them what we call the fast movers. In the background you can hear this roar coming, and you know it's the fast movers coming in. You know they're coming in with some hot stuff. You know once they leave, you're not going to have no more problem, because they annihilate everything in that tree line.
Very, very spooky, loud. We could feel the heat from the napalm as it exploded. The jungle would literally shudder as these fast movers came in and dropped their loads on target. So just an incredible display of firepower.
Canadians go into battle with maple leaves drawn on their helmets and stitched to their American uniforms. Widely dispersed throughout the large U.S. Army, most serve unaware of their own numbers.
I never thought there was any Canadians over there, I guess I'm the only one. I never even thought about it, but I've never met any.
We thought we were the only one, and as it turns out, we weren't.
Knowlton Nash travels to Vietnam in 1967 as a journalist with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation.
But you just run into them accidentally. I'd run into a few of them in the course of just prowling around the Saigon or I'm off on a patrol. You'd suddenly find a guy from Moose Jaw or a guy from Montreal or something of that kind. His attitude was not really very much different from that of his colleagues. They were almost a band of brothers.
As far as the Americans were concerned, we were one of them. We did get the odd ribbing about being Canadian.
We were forced to come here. Why are you here, But they accepted us, They thought it was a great thing for us to be there.
What happens is the guys that you're serving with become your family. I wrote to my family and my girlfriend and friends with the thinking that if you didn't write letters, you wouldn't receive them, and nothing cheers a soldier up more than a letter from home.
Well, I see by your letter you're getting some good weather up there now. The weather over here has really been hot.
As long as you can get a letter from home, you're still in touch with the real world. Even though you're in an insane situation, you're still in touch with the real world.
All through the day you're out in the hot sun. That wears you down after a while.
And later on in the war, I managed to get a hold of a small portable tape recorder. So I'd send my family tapes instead of letters.
So I'll say goodbye for now. Give my love to the kids, to everyone else. Write or send me a tape as soon as you can. Bye-bye.
Large American bases provide sanctuary from a dangerous life in the field. Canadian veteran Charles Dowell is stationed at Camp Davies, near Saigon.
Our camp had every facility you could think. We had a movie theater, a swimming pool, we had a movie theater, we had bars on camp. It was just like being in the States. We head for Saigon. There's a street called Tudo Street in Saigon. And that's Paris of the East. There's anything you want's on Tudo Street. If you want it, it's on that street. Bar girls, they were interesting things. They were there for one thing.
Oh, Susie Q. Oh, Susie Q. Oh, Susie Q, baby, I love you. Susie Q. Like the way you walk. You're gonna win a body bag, do-da. You're gonna win a body bag, oh, do-da-day. Shot between the eyes, shot between the thighs. You're gonna win a body bag, oh, do-da-day.
Maybe there was a lull in fighting or a lull in bombing or whatever, and it was just quiet and peaceful. And you could sit back and say, man, this is a beautiful country. It's really, really nice.
It was like going back 300 years and watching these people do their thing. Everything was like everything was made out of wood.
And then, of course, the mortars would start flying again, and that vision went out the window.
American strategy does not aim to hold territory. Instead, enemy body counts become a common measure for gauging success. Military statistics are viewed with skepticism by a press corps enjoying unfettered access to the battlefield. Knowlton Nash recalls the daily briefings in Saigon in 1967.
It was called the 5 o'clock Follies, and the reason it was called the 5 o'clock Follies was that it was essentially a spin operation. You quickly came to be skeptical of what the officials were saying because they were lying. You would go out into the field, you'd see something happening, and you'd come back and you'd hear a description of what was happening, and it was totally at variance with everything you saw with your own eyes.
It does seem fair to say, though, that the Americans are winning this war, in the sense that they and the South Vietnamese are killing more of their enemy than they are having killed. and they are gradually and painfully extending their area of control. At the present rate, however, it will be many years, if ever, before you could think of the whole country as being secure. Knowlton Nash, CBC News in Vietnam.
By going out on patrol with these guys, spending nights with them, and being as scared as they are when they're into a firefight of some kind, that's when you learn what a decision taken in a boardroom is, what the consequences of it are.
For soldiers carrying out American strategy, intense battles for small parcels of land that are soon abandoned wears on morale.
It was a hilltop. It was yours for that day. If you moved off it that day, as soon as you were gone, the Viet Cong moved in and took it over. And you go back next week, you take that hilltop back off them again, stay there for a couple more days, you'd move off, they'd take it back over again.
At the beginning, we thought we were there for a purpose, but as the time went by and the months went by, we sensed there was no relief, there was no gaining on anything.
In South Vietnam's highlands, American paratroopers begin a routine assault on a remote hill named 875. Unexpectedly, they walk directly into a fortress of communist tunnels and bunkers. An entire company of paratroopers is wiped out. 2 others are trapped. George Post is with the 2nd Battalion, fighting its way up the hillside to provide relief to the encircled troops.
We got there at 4 in the afternoon. We started to see a lot of bodies, mostly American, of course, and there was quite a few Vietnamese. They started to bomb us. A lot of people who were wounded got wounded again and killed and so on.
An offensive up the hill falls short, and as night looms, soldiers retreat and wait for dawn. The hill is covered with the dead and wounded. The mood is desperate.
It just hits you all of a sudden and it's black. It's daylight and then it's black. Everything clouds over. Dead bodies and pieces and blood and screams and everything. We got back down to the area and nobody said much. We smoked a couple of cigarettes. We all stayed to ourselves. Some were saying their rosaries, some were saying prayers. The hill was shaped like a jello mold. That's how much they were putting the artillery on there. You couldn't hear nobody. It was so intense that there was no color. It was smoke, fire, it was black and gray.
November 23rd, Thanksgiving Day. With American dead and wounded numbering close to 1,000, a push for the summit begins. Surprisingly, it takes only 20 minutes. The North Vietnamese have abandoned the hill, carrying off most of their casualties.
When we got there, we thought we had won the whole war, you know. We were going to find stacks and stacks. But that wasn't the case. We found a lot of broken weaponry, but their enemy, they had carried them off. About lunch hour, we had turkey flown in. Thanksgiving Day, they brought in containers full of turkey, ice cream, and you name it, they brought it up. I said, here, enjoy it, you deserve it. Stay cool. And they gave me this ice cream. And I have never ate out chocolate ice cream since then.
The battle for Hill 875 is proclaimed a victory. Very soon after, it is abandoned.
When you end up losing one of the guys, it hits you pretty hard, really, really hard. The first guy I lost, I broke down in tears. I just couldn't handle it.
After you've lost friends, you tend to remain distant and not want to bond. Yeah, once you befriend somebody, you lose them. It hurts more than if you weren't their friend.
If they're still alive and then they die on you, you try and make them comfortable and let them know somebody gave a damn of what they did over there. The majority of us, we just felt like nobody gives a damn, so we cared about each other. So I held a guy that died one night, and his last words were "Mama." So anyway.
After nearly 3 years of war, there are close to 500,000 U.S. troops in Vietnam. More are on the way.
No matter how many thousands and hundreds of thousands of troops you put in there, you always seem to need more. And I think that's what began to question, when the media began to question what was happening, when the public began to question what was happening.
In late 1967, there is talk of light at the end of the tunnel. However, for the public back home watching the war on television, that light is about to go out. Tet, the Vietnamese New Year. Coinciding with a declared holiday truce, a massive surprise offensive is launched by communist forces.
One morning, all hell broke loose.
The enemy very deceitfully has taken advantage of the Tet truce in order to create maximum consternation.
While the world watches, the American embassy in Saigon is occupied, then recaptured. The cultural center of Hue falls. Literally overnight, every city, town, and American base in the South comes under fierce attack.
And they attacked our base, and they were coming on with satchel charges, blowing up the helicopters on the helipad. And then they were going after the hospitals, and they were lobbing rockets in, and they were doing all kinds of nasty stuff. And we saw them close up. They were 50 yards away, coming at you, and realized you got to kill him or he's going to kill you. Because you're looking right into somebody's face and you're blowing them away. It's not very pleasant.
After weeks of intense combat, the communist offensive gives up all of its early gains. Although a military failure for North Vietnam, it secures an important coup 10,000 miles away on the American home front.
It brought forward in a very graphic way, television screens and newspaper coverage and the like, that maybe the Americans could lose.
To say that we are closer to victory today is to believe, in the face of the evidence, the optimists who have been wrong in the past. To suggest we are on the edge of defeat is to yield to unreasonable pessimism. To say that we are mired in stalemate seems the only realistic, if unsatisfactory, conclusion. But it is increasingly clear to this reporter that the only rational way out then will be to negotiate, not as victors, but as an honorable people who lived up to their pledge to defend democracy and did the best they could.
And Lyndon Johnson was quoted as saying that if he'd lost Walter Cronkite, he's lost everybody. And this was a real factor in his judgment about leaving.
I shall not seek and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
In 1968, a growing peace movement back in the United States takes center stage. Disillusionment and rising American casualties swell the ranks of angry protesters demanding an end to the war. In Canada, demonstrations are staged outside the American consulate and on university campuses across the country.
So we organized meetings and sit-ins and love-ins and lie-ins across railway tracks to stop the Canadian railways delivering the napalm or the TNT. And people wrote letters to their MPs, and some ran for Parliament.
We feel that Canada's government is very much involved in the war in Vietnam and supporting the Vietnam diplomatically and through arms shipments to the United States.
They had a case for it. They said, what's the difference between being there and providing arms? And you have to draw the line and say, well, there is a difference because it's not our war, and we're not involved directly.
Yes, of course there's a major difference between supplying arms and being there. Being there means that you put yourself out for it. Supplying arms means that you're an arms supplier.
Former Cabinet Minister Mitchell Sharp.
It would have been sold anyway. Oh yes, they had demands for munitions for activities all over the world.
But we have this understanding, this relationship with the United States, and we can't just cut them off because we don't agree that they should be over there.
You can almost say that being the arms supplier might be even the more reprehensible because you're profiting on other people's deaths.
It was the American war, not our war. And it, you know, you ask, why do we continue to have to treat the Americans as allies? Because they are.
It was the beginning of doublespeak. Either we abided by the terms of the Geneva Agreement, or we didn't.
We relayed information, in some ways maybe threats, implicit threats, to the North Vietnamese, and were seen as go-betweens in some ways, with clearly an American agenda.
Canadian diplomats spied for the CIA. Canadian members of the ICC also.
I think that the distinction was we were non-participants strongly, but not neutral. And there is a distinction.
I would flip that around. I think we should have been neutral because we were part of the observing team. And certainly, you know, we weren't not involved because through our contracts with the defense industry, how the defense industry in North America is sort of just totally intertwined, and our military is intertwined, I think on many levels we were involved.
Along with public protest, activists strive to put a human face on the war's distant enemy. Representatives from North Vietnam are provided with public platforms on Canadian university campuses.
We don't have aircraft to bomb the United States of America. We don't have enough napalm to drop over the children, the schools, and universities in the United States of America. Who are the Americans in South Vietnam? 500,000 GIs who are killing our people there. So don't we have to fight? Don't we have the right to defend ourselves, to kill the American and their henchmen?
Now look, just a minute, just a minute. Now,
Even as protest rises, the war continues to draw young Canadian men to the American Armed Forces. John Gordon Radcliffe volunteers in 1968.
My friends thought I was crazy, most of them. Of course, my mother was upset, and my father didn't like the idea, but he himself had volunteered for the Second World War, and so there wasn't very much he could say about that, specifically because there is a sense in which I was following in his footsteps.
In the United States, a growing number of young men refuse to serve in the military. Tens of thousands of them travel north, seeking sanctuary in Canada.
Canada ultimately represented the only viable solution to me at the time. Canada made its position reasonably clear, very clear in accepting draft dodgers, which personally meant a lot. The fact that there were industrial ties to the war was unfortunate.
We got the cream, in a sense, of a whole generation of Americans. We got young people that were articulate, that were bright, that were sensitive, that were good people, who didn't want to go out and kill.
At that time, you knew about Trudeau because he had just come into office. And you knew about his more progressive thinking. And he was not your usual politician. He was not your usual American politician. He was not Richard Nixon.
Elected on a platform promising peace with honor, Richard Nixon wages war for another 3 years.
Let us be united for peace. Let us also be united against defeat. Because let us understand, North Vietnam cannot defeat or humiliate the United States. Only Americans can do that.
Seeking a decisive blow to bring North Vietnam to the negotiating table on American terms, Nixon continues intense bombing. In 1970, he extends the battlefield to neighboring Cambodia.
It's hard on all of us. I know we're all tired of this. Tired.
You want to get back to Vietnam?
I never thought I'd be saying that either. I want to go to Vietnam for a change instead of staying in Cambodia.
The beat goes on. The beat goes on. Drums keep pounding a rhythm to the brain. La-da-da-da-dee. La-da-da-da-da. Charleston was once the rage,
With talk of a gradual American withdrawal, there is a growing sense of betrayal among soldiers still in the field.
The government wasn't fighting the war to win, and then eventually that filters down through the troops who are saying, you know, what are we doing this for?
We had the elements against us, we had the VC, we had the NVA, and we had the South Vietnamese people who didn't like us, didn't want us over there anyway. And then we had people at home getting on our case.
We all became very reluctant warriors. We didn't, we had a sense that the war was winding down, and nobody wanted to be the last grunt to die in Vietnam.
New draftees bring with them the anti-war sentiment from home. Battle is frequently avoided. Drug use is on the rise.
Everybody in Vietnam had to have a crutch. A lot of the older servicemen, soldiers, whatever, had alcohol. Another one was religion. A lot of people got closer to their God. And then, of course, there was marijuana. Marijuana was so easy to get, and such high quality and so cheap. I mean, I don't think I spent any money at all in there except 50 cents on a pack of tailor-made joints.
It is. This is really nice stuff over here. Real good. Shotgun. I make it down here maybe twice a day. Sometimes in the morning I'll come down here, sometimes in the afternoon. Then we really get it on in the evening up there at the fire base. Don't you know that I'll always be true?
Không đem lại cái quyền lợi gì cho họ.
They fought with no purpose, without bringing any benefit to them. If they died, they viewed that death as useless. Thus, that showed them the reality of war, the reality of death, of injury, of eating dirt, of sleeping under dew, and everything at the battlefield. From that, they started to have thoughts. They thought, who are they fighting for? For Les Brown, the futility of the war leads to a personal act of defiance. In 1970, while still in the field, he puts down his machine gun.
I did, in fact, turn in my weapon and apply for conscientious objector status. I felt a total sense of betrayal and hopelessness. I felt betrayed by the U.S. Army, by the government, by the whole world, really. I didn't want to die in Vietnam.
The average tour of duty in Vietnam lasts 1 year. Counting down the days is a soldier ritual.
When you knew you were coming to the end of your tour, the closer you got to that, the more excited you became. When you climb on that plane, which we learned to call the Freedom Bird because you were flying home to freedom. Probably the greatest feeling you'll ever know. As that plane lifts off the ground, you look back and you see the earth moving away from you, and you know you're on your way home.
Of announcing that we today have concluded an agreement to end the war and bring peace with honor in Vietnam and in Southeast Asia.
By the early 1970s, the anti-war sentiment of the protest movement has engulfed Middle America. The war effort no longer has public support.
All American forces will be withdrawn from South Vietnam. The people of South Vietnam have been guaranteed the right to determine their own future without outside interference.
In January of 1973, a truce marks the end of American involvement. The South Vietnamese army, left on its own, is no match for the North. In 1975, Saigon falls, and Vietnam is united under the leadership in Hanoi. For young men returning home, the transition from soldier to civilian is rapid and disorienting. After life in a combat zone, a shower and clean clothing does little to ease a mind hardwired for survival. Monty Coles returns to Montreal.
The slightest noise, you were instantly awake and ready for action. And I mean instantly. The first night I came home, my mother came in to wake me up next morning, not realizing what she was doing. She came over and shook my shoulder, and I come up out of that bed and I almost killed her. A good 2 months after that, she'd stand back and wake me up with a broomstick.
Past 36 hours from time that I left Vietnam to standing in London, and they give me clean clothes, but I still had the smell of the jungle on me, so that was fast.
Just mind-boggling, confusing, hard to understand. And guys would sit down for that meal with their family and still have mud under their fingernails from Vietnam.
I arrived there, I was 19, and I came home a couple of years later, and I felt like I was 35. You know, it's just amazing what combat will do to you.
A lot of us have been to a very dark place that I'm not sure you completely come home from.
I think the most horrible memory, and then it's bad. It wakes me up at night. There was no action in the area for weeks and weeks, and we were just on a regular routine patrol. And this little girl comes out of the village, it must have been 3 or 4, cute as a button, just waving and laughing and coming towards me. And she went off the trail a little bit and she stepped on a mine. Pieces of flesh flew at me. She was innocent, she wasn't a soldier, she wasn't fighting any bloody war with anybody. That was the worst, the absolute worst. And I hope it goes away.
Along with the trauma of battle, there is an additional burden for Canadian veterans. Not only is the Lost War unpopular, it is also an American war.
They weren't drafted, they went there out of their own choice. Well, it's a person you want to talk to, you want to have words with. Why did you go? You know, what's going on here?
And I'm probably going to use some words here people don't like, but I had this long-haired, hippie creep come up to me, spit on me and call me a baby killer. To this day, I don't know why I didn't beat him. I really don't.
They would be seen similar to the way veterans were seen in the United States, even worse, as if somehow they were suckered, that they were stupid. And that's our Canadian smugness, I would say.
We got called all the names the Americans did, but then we were also called mercenaries, hired killers.
I quickly learned to become a closet vet because there was no meaningful dialogue going on between those that went and those that didn't go. We couldn't help each other.
In the U.S., there's a good chance there's somebody in the area that's either been to Nam or been in the military during that time, because everybody was basically being drafted. Canadians didn't have that to fall back on when they got home.
But I was starting to really feel flashbacks, and I hadn't talked to anybody about Vietnam because I didn't think anybody understood, anybody cared, so I kept my mouth shut. I was really feeling bad, and I felt I got to get around other veterans.
Looking for fraternity, Mike Gillhoolley visits a Quebec branch of the Royal Canadian Legion. As a veteran of a foreign war, he does not qualify for membership. And instead of understanding, he is greeted with animosity.
Well, why would anybody want to just volunteer for a war that we weren't involved in? That's something that a lot of people couldn't perceive as being a right thing to do.
Through newspaper ads and word of mouth, veterans of Vietnam gradually seek one another out. Surprised by their own numbers, they soon form discussion groups and associations in every major Canadian city. Wanting a resting place for their own memorial, the veterans are turned away by Ottawa. The city of Windsor, Ontario eventually steps forward to provide them with land. But for many, there is still a longing for formal recognition on a national level.
I'd like to see the Canadian government supply and install a national memorial for the Canadians served in Vietnam. They have memorials for World War I, World War II, Korea. Hey, whether they like it or not, it's citizens served in Vietnam.
Why should we honor them?
I'm not downplaying their sacrifice, but they weren't sacrificing for Canada. They were fighting in a foreign war. They were fighting in a foreign uniform. Let's say that they went and joined the Vietnamese forces. Would we recognize them? Why not?
Canada, after all, was supposed to have played a neutral role. And for us to now give some honor or some recognition for those Canadians who fought for another country in another war, I don't think would make much sense. And I don't think the Canadian public would support that either.
Vietnam today is a thriving, independent nation. Yet the refuse of a long, brutal conflict still disfigures the landscape. Stark memorials to the more than 1 million Vietnamese who lost their lives. For Canada, 30 years and 10,000 miles from the scarred battlefield, there remain the lingering ghosts of an American war.
There never was a real debate in this country saying, this $2 billion in weapons gives us wealth. Choose. We're on this commission as an American ally. Here are the consequences if we don't. Choose.
They never did. And then they made billions of dollars off the war in Vietnam, and they claimed this silent complicity that, oh no, we never supported that war. Well, you made money off it. That's support.
Maybe we had a kind of schizophrenia about it. We loved to make the money and loved to have our high moral horse at the same time.
While on the one hand we want a positive image, we want an image of Canada as a peace-loving nation, it's also important for us to know when we don't do that.
Well, it's very difficult to earn international trust as a true peacekeeper. And you take side. And when you take side, in international effort like this, it's very difficult to be a peacemaker.
Canada was involved, big time, in a big way. You can't get away from that.
How do we explain to the Canadians why we did what we did? What motivated us? Are we any different than our fathers were?
No. I did what the time wanted me to do, and what I was motivated to do, and what I believed in.
Everybody was doing sort of what they thought was right at the time, and then later dealing with the consequences.
People can call me all the names they want. They can brand me as a mercenary, hard killer. I don't care. I'm very, very proud to have done what I did.